Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for carving out this time this morning for the launch of the 11th Life Report. We've been doing this for 22 years in this community. It seems like it couldn't possibly be that long. And I do just want to mention that I think most of us know, but Marathon County really stands alone in the commitment to this report. And so that's rather exciting, and we cannot take that for granted. So again, welcome. My name is Karen Katz, and I have the absolute privilege of chairing the Life Report. So we'll move right along here. A few housekeeping comments here. You know, we do this all the time. We give you the report after this presentation. So when you leave, you will be handed, if you want one, a full copy of the report, and then there are the snapshot reports too. And the snapshot is kind of like the Reader's Digest version of the Life Report. There are additional reports available at United Way, and the report is available online. And the neat thing about the online version is it's a color version. So some people might prefer that. Oopsie, here we go. So the purpose of the Life Report, you know, we have to start with remembering why we do this thing. And if I can turn my note page here. Okay, so there are three main purposes to the Life Report, and it's to always acknowledge community strengths, identify the community challenges, and then, and this is so important, to serve as a catalyst for change by advancing community conversation and partnerships around those calls to action. It's easy to just jump straight to the calls to action, but we have to remember that we have a tremendous assets in Marathon County, and we have to celebrate and acknowledge those. Of course, these, let's see here. The report doesn't do itself, and we're going to get to the volunteers in a minute, but we have tremendously great support in terms of financial support in our county for this report. On the screen, you're going to see two slides that really acknowledge our partnerships. And truly, again, there's so many great things. You can tell I'm just passionate about this report. But a lot of these sponsors have been with the report since the first one, and that just shows not only the support of the community that's represented by the people who come here for the launch of it every 2 years, but also by the people who are willing to either donate in-kind services or to write a check every 2 years. And we simply could not do the report without that. This is a volunteer effort. It's a tremendous volunteer effort. And right here, the slide you're looking at is the steering committee, the people who are on the steering committee for the Life Report. They are the governing body for this report. You'll see asterisks behind some people's names, and they are the chairs of our subcommittee. So the structure of the Life Report is one where we have the steering committee, but then we have 6 subcommittees that report up to the steering committee, and these subcommittees are the lifeblood of this report. They do the work of the report, and we've got 6 of them. It's basic needs and supports, economic environment, education, energy and environment, connected, health and wellness, and safety. And these subcommittees, they meet regularly for quite a while, at least a year plus straight, and actually dig into the indicators. When you look at the report, you know there's a bunch of indicators on there, and they actually do the work and the data discovery that's in each of those indicators. So again, we're just grateful for the subcommittees. This year, we added a new element to the Life Project. We added a volunteer advisory team, and we intentionally looked for categories of people to put on this advisory team. And the purpose of the advisory team was to inform the priority setting process. So the work they did went to the steering committee to help inform and broaden our understanding of community needs. And so you're seeing the people who gave up a good solid afternoon to do this here. Again, I talked about the subcommittees. Each subcommittee has a lot of people on it, too many to put on a screen, but right now I'd like to ask if you were on the steering committee or in a subcommittee, if you would please rise so that we can first off see the number of people, so please stand up. I know that there's many of you here, and then to give you just a wonderful round of applause. Thank you very, very much. There are, all total, there's over 100 people involved in getting this report out every 2 years. Our hosting agency, our fiscal sponsor is United Way, so we're grateful to them for what they do for the report. And I do want to introduce Jessie Halad. If you could please stand. Jessie was our staff person this year, and when you see the report, you're going to see her hand in action. She brought a tremendous amount to this report this year. So Jessie, thank you very much. Okay. So now let's move into the nitty-gritty of the report itself. This year, when you get your big document, you're going to see a different kind of a structure. You know, in the past we had 6 different sections that aligned straight line with the subcommittees. This year we have 4 sections in the report, and it's prosperous, healthy, safe, and connected. And these categories truly serve as descriptors in painting a picture of the quality of life in Marathon County. So the indicators were all aligned within those 4 categories. And one of the beautiful things about that is these categories very closely align with the 2016 Marathon County Comprehensive Plan. So now, here are some of the report findings this year. We're going to start with the community's success and progresses, and you see them printed on here, and certainly in the report they go into a lot more detail. We're reporting this year that our successes are child success in school, openness to explore diversity, access to health care, a strong economy, substance abuse education, affordable housing, and then data on the youth risk behaviors. And Jeff's going to talk more about that in his time here. But a tremendous asset to our community, our strength. And our assets, and I am going to review these in a little more detail. We start with education. So we have a very great collaboration of educational organizations in our community and a very strong birth to teen educational opportunities. When we talk about environment, there's a great collaboration of natural resource organizations in our community, very active outdoor lifestyle, and we have tremendous natural resources. Lifestyle, this is a great place to raise kids. Spiritual support is accepted and available, and it is a safe place to live. Our survey tells us that. Economic, there are numerous family-owned manufacturing businesses. Marathon County is the North Central hub, providing an attraction for others to come here. When we talk about health as an asset, there are many health initiatives that are active in our community and supported. And collaboration really is a way of life. I mean, I think everyone in this room would absolutely agree with that. And when we talk about connected, we care about diversity. And the life report itself really demonstrates the community's commitment to the quality of life. So now, the moment we've all been waiting for. Our calls to action this year. You know, that's what we're all about here. We do offer up community calls to action. And so, let's see here. The first one is mental health. That's been on our radar screen for a long time. It's on the radar screen of a lot of people in our community. And the mental health of individuals in Marathon County, and especially youth, truly warrants attention. Schools throughout Marathon County are struggling with managing mental health of children as a result of childhood trauma. The stigma and cost and shortage of mental health care providers we all are aware of, and the suicide risk has increased among high school students, as has the number of youth reporting feelings of hopelessness. And again, I'm just breezing through these right now, but really when you get the report, please just dig in. Our next call to action is substance abuse. Illegal drug use was the #1 issue of concern among the 2017 Life Survey respondents. Drug overdoses were the #1 cause of injury-related deaths among individuals aged 15 to 64. And the last comment that I'll make here is that e-cigarette use is on the rise, yet there is a low level of concern regarding its use. Our next call to action is bullying. Bullying and the pressures of social media, social isolation pose a threat to security, confidence, and self-esteem of both youth and adults in Marathon County. And just pointing to this, 43.5% of high school students who took the 2017 Marathon County Youth Risk Behavior Survey indicate that they believe bullying at their school is a problem. Also, 27% of students said they do not feel that they have a teacher or an adult whom they can talk to if they have a problem. Next one, broadband access. This is critical to keep up with the trends in education, employment, healthcare, and public safety. If you live in an area where you don't have access to the internet, you are going to struggle in those areas. 40%, according to the FCC, 40% of rural Wisconsin does not have broadband access. And the costs of internet services also tend to be much higher in rural areas. Did it come? Wait. There we go. And our last call to action that we're going to point out this morning is future job growth. Training to job demand will be key to delivering the workforce needed to fill upcoming vacancies created by retirement and additional new job growth. This is especially true in health services and education. So we have a tremendous need in our community to promote training and education to not only fill these openings, but to encourage people to move into higher paying jobs. So I have one more thing that I want to talk about, and you'll see this as a common thread, I think, through the report, really pointing out the point that our community is a system. And this graphic up here just really points that out, how everything is connected. The community is a system of interconnected parts, and working collaboratively and across boundaries is absolutely necessary for us to achieve success. So I am going to now introduce Jeff Sargent. He's the Executive Director of United Way, and he's going to pick it up from here and introduce the topic that we'll be focusing on today, resilience.
Which button is it? Let's get to the important thing. Okay, all right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. I know the weather, for some people, that is a challenge, and hopefully you all made it here safe today. We are going to talk about our topic today, and we got some great speakers, and we got a couple of videos we're going to show you. And really the topic we're going to talk about is resilience. And that, resilience is often thought of as the ability to withstand hard times or to bounce back from a negative event. And you can see what a dictionary says about resilience. And I think a lot of people have an idea of what resilience is, but how do you implement resilience in a community? And we have a couple of speakers today that are going to talk about that, and I'm going to just provide a little foundation for their comments. And it really revolves around the 6 foundations of resilience. And some of you have maybe heard of the Post-Carbon Institute, and they're a think tank, and they do a lot of work and research, and one of the areas that they focus in on is resilience, and what does it mean for a community to be resilient. And the concepts regarding resilience really have to do with preserving some of the qualities within a community that are good, while others tend to fade away. In that you basically want to preserve what the identity of something is, but then build on that around things that we really value. And part of what we're trying to talk about today is some of the things that we value around resilience. So the first one is people. Obviously, we're all here today because we care about our community. In that, what the community is now and what it will be in the future really is a result of the decisions made by people. In that people interacting, people negotiating, people working together, that's how you get things done. And that trust and relationships are built by the people holding the community together to make decisions for the future. Systems thinking. You saw Karen in the previous slide about the community as a system. When you think about resilience, you have to think about a community as a complex series of systems that are constantly changing and interacting with each other. In that there's economic activity, there's different kinds of relationships and partnerships and collaborations, there's social groups, And there's cultural patterns that all interact in terms of what really creates what a community is. Adaptability. You know, a community has to adapt to change, then it's resilient. You know, if you've ever read that book, Who Moved My Cheese, you know, the cheese sits there, the one mouse just says, I'm going to wait for my cheese to come back because somebody moved it. And then the other mouse says, I'm not waiting for the cheese, I'm going to go find it. And so really the idea around adaptability, and you can see in this picture, I don't know if you can see that, is that like a lizard or something? You know, I mean, it's like, it looks like a tree trunk, but it's actually a lizard. And really, the idea here is that by taking advantage of our diversity, by being inclusive, by being open to different systems, we have the ability to be adaptable. Transformability, you know, we need to transform. You know, some of the challenges are so big and so complex that it really is not simple enough, you know, simply adapting isn't enough, that we actually have to transform. And so as a community, and you know, you see some of the calls to action today, you know, I've been involved with the Life Report for quite a few years, and there's a couple of them in there that are somewhat different, you know, that aren't maybe the ones you would always think of. And really that has to do with transforming our community. Sustainability, clearly resilience is not sustainable if it only serves us right now and as we are today, and that we need to look ahead, we need to be future thinking, we need to think about our future generations. You know, we have to find a way to keep our community sustainable and not just think about what we need right now. And then of course the last one is courage. It really takes courage for individuals and communities to do something, you know, to confront challenging issues and take responsibility for our collective future. And that courage really brings us around back to the first one, which is people. Because people of a community will build resilience. And our speakers are going to talk about resilience in some different realms today, but it's really about people. You know, it's the courage to work with other people, to share the responsibility for our community. You know, it's the courage to tackle complex, systematic, and systemic issues that we face. It takes courage to learn from experience and to adapt our thinking and our methods. And it takes courage to accept uncertainty and to think about new transformations when they're necessary. And that courage to commit to far-reaching and long-term resilience building that is truly sustainable. And with that, we're going to show a video before we get to our first speaker. And this video is from a documentary video series called Marathon County Teen. And it's based on the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which was an online survey conducted by the Centers of Disease Control and the Department of Public Instruction to monitor health risk behaviors of the nation's high school students. The series highlights what life is like for teens living in Marathon County. Over 2,000 students in over 10 Marathon County public schools participated in the survey. And you'll see that there's also the reports are out in the lobby to pick up after today's event. But what we're going to do is we're going to start with this first series on mental health and stress, and it's done locally here in Marathon County, and then we'll introduce our first speaker.
I know there's a lot of anxiety because I have anxiety really bad, and I know other people do too. Depression, yeah.
Unfortunately, right now the trend is being depressed. You'll find a lot of people posting, sometimes descriptive, depressing posts on Facebook about wanting to kill themselves or Math class was so bad today, kill myself. It kind of made me feel bad because I'm actually depressed. I have an actual problem. When you're in a sad state, one little pick will feel like a whole wound.
I used to cut. It was only for a short while, and that's when I was extremely stressful, when I was going back and forth between households.
Sport in school can be a lot, and then when you add a family issue on top of that, that's like the trifecta right there, or maybe there's money issues at home.
A lot of us, what we come here to school is we put on a happy face, but what's going on at home is a whole nother can of worms, and people don't really see that.
All the stuff with my grandma and my uncle, and then on school, just everything was on top of me, like it's all on my shoulders.
I don't know, for a while it was really hard. Like right now I'm on some sort of depression medicine. Sometimes I would just give up completely. Like I just kind of stopped trying. All my grades started to drop. I was like, there's no use, because like I'm failing this and I keep trying to get out of it, and then something else will get tacked onto it, and I won't be able to like finish one thing on time. It's like snowball effect. It starts small and rolls into a huge problem.
You know, it's just the pressure. It's expectations of people. School, your future career, judgment from others. I mean, eventually you just get to the point where you stop caring.
I don't think they understand the pressure of expectation and how much is healthy and how much is not.
I think they don't understand that we have a lot going on, not just like with school or with like homework or jobs or anything, but I think personally we're all still trying to find ourselves. Oh, like you're fine. You know, you're just freaking out. It's just your hormones. And like even if it is, I think that they should still be understanding and realize that it's how we feel.
I'm kind of socially anxious, so that kind of puts like a damper on my ability to kind of fit in with some kids. It just kind of creates sort of a hard environment to be in, like all day, every day.
I've never really been confident in myself. I don't know why. I focus on my looks and my grades too.
What about you? Do you have anyone in your life?
Not really.
So how do you handle it all?
Just keep it to myself.
And that never gets too much for you?
Not yet.
So do you feel alone?
Yeah, a little bit. Just deal with it.
But you wouldn't like talk to your parents about that kind of thing?
Not really. No, they've been through so much. I wouldn't want to worry them.
Is that how you feel?
Yeah.
I think it should be talked about more because like we put so much emphasis on like drugs and alcohol and sex and all that, but they don't put emphasis on things like depression and your happiness and how to live a happy life. And I feel like that's so much more important because that can, if you fix that problem, it can lead to fixing a lot of the other problems. And when kids are happier with themselves, they make better decisions.
Okay, now I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and it is Tony Iniguez. And he's a former teacher in art education working as a trauma education specialist with the Marshfield Child Advocacy Center Resilience Clinic. Tony has over 17 years of public school teaching experience both in high school and elementary school levels. Tony spent most of his teaching career in East Aurora High School in Illinois, teaching art and working with children in a predominantly resource-poor and Hispanic community. Most recently, he taught K-5 art in Adams Friendship at Rocha Cree and Grand Marsh schools. He is currently working with children who are experiencing the effects of trauma and neglect, the caregivers and teachers, and school ancillary staff to create a more trauma-informed and trauma-responsive environment at home, school, and after school. Tony is a two-time U.S. Paralympian, having competed in the 1992 Paralympic Games in Barcelona and 2008 Paralympic Games in Beijing in marathon and middle-distance wheelchair track events. It's really an honor to have Tony here. I've heard him speak. He does a great job. And I think today we're going to dispel the myth that you can't have local speakers that are dynamic, and you don't have to come from hundreds of miles away to have an impact. So let's welcome Tony.
All right. Yep, you can hear me. Thank you for coming out again in this weather. And thank you for that introduction, Jeff. Today I'm going to talk about resilience in the context of individual and family, and and I also want to kind of talk about it in the context of nature, okay, which is our genes, our genetic makeup, and also nurture, our environment, which I think both play a critical role in our capacity to have resilience. Most of you probably look at me and you assume that I am resilient, okay? And a lot of it, and some of you will probably think that a lot of it has to do with my mental fortitude, or what we call grit. There's a wonderful episode a show I heard on NPR last week about grit, which I think is, it's an important part of being resilient. But the other thing that I think is more important, more so than that mental fortitude or that mental toughness, is the people that I grew up with, okay? My environment, my family, my communities, both in Mexico and here in the US. So I kind of want to draw your attention to this study by Ellis and Boyce, which was done in 2008. And I'm not going to go through it, but if you get a chance, look it up. And in their study, they kind of talk about resilience in children. And they do this analogy or this parallel between flowers and humans, right? And so up here we have two flowers. We have an orchid on our left and a dandelion on our right. And those flowers fall on a spectrum of resilience out in nature too. And so when we consider the orchid, we know that the orchid tends to be a little bit more highly responsive to stress. And so you look at it wrong and it wilts and falls apart, right? That orchid basically can't handle extreme temperatures. It can't handle strong winds, too much water, too little water. It has to have the perfect environment for it to be able to flourish. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the dandelion. And the dandelion can basically handle a very high amounts of stress. And so we consider the dandelion to be highly resilient and less responsive to stressful situations, right? So it can have heat, cooler temperatures, very little water, wind, strong winds, and even people trying to mow them down, right? You're driving your mower, and those little pesky dandelions, they kind of fall over. Then once you pass them, they stand back up, and sometimes I feel like they flip their middle petal at me, but I'm not sure. As humans, we kind of tend to fall on that same of the spectrum. We basically have a similar parallel in terms of resilience, right? And some of you out here are orchids, and some of you are dandelions, but many of you fall in that spectrum in between, okay? The one thing I want you guys to realize about resilience is that it's a dynamic process, okay? It's not a static thing. You don't get resilience and you get an award or a certificate and you kind of walk around with it saying I'm resilient, okay? It doesn't work that way, okay? Resilience depends on a lot of things. And again, some of it genetic, a lot of it more has to do with our environment, okay? So the thing that we want to know though, okay, whether you're a dandelion or an orchid, it doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter because when we consider these two flowers, we know that they both will flourish and flower beautifully if they have access to sunshine, okay, which is their source of energy or food. If both of these flowers have access to water, which is hydration, if both of these flowers have access to warmth, okay, or protection, buffering from the environment, they're going to flourish and they're going to blossom really well. And as humans, we are very similar to these flowers. Okay, that if we have access to consistent and stable food, okay, which is our source of energy, if we have stable and consistent sources of water, clean water, if we have warmth or shelter in our case, right? And again, it's got to be consistent and stable so that we don't have to worry about where we're going to live next or we're going to have to be displaced or homeless. But then the other important one and the last one there is that protection or that buffering effect that parents, caregivers, teachers, and community members offer to individuals in a community. Okay? And so we can't overlook that. I want to kind of draw your attention also to these key ingredients that lead to the capacity for resilience. Now, there aren't any, there's been a lot of research, and we know that there's not, there aren't any specific traits that lead to resilience, but these are 4 that really tend to come up over and over, okay? Especially when we look at children after they've bounced back from maltreatment. And so the first one up there is autonomy, okay, or what we call locus of control. And that's, again, that's your genes, right? So you have that mental fortitude. People that are resilient, they tend to believe that they can affect change not only in their community, but also in their future, right? They don't feel that, they're not fatalistic. They don't feel like their life has been predetermined for them, okay? That locus of control fluctuates based on where you are emotionally and physically, okay? So when we are safe, protected, when our basic needs are met, we tend to believe that we can impact change. Okay? When those things are taken away from us, we feel that we don't have that control. Okay? So autonomy is key. The second one that you see up there, which I think is very, very important, is having a strong and stable family environment. That family environment doesn't have to be your traditional, mom and dad at home. It could be a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle. And I think this speaks volumes also for the foster care system. Okay? So even foster care families, as long as they're strong and stable, the key word there is stable, right? As humans, we love predictability and stability. Okay? And that's what helps build our resilience, or the capacity for resilience. The third one there is having a supportive relationships. And supportive relationships, again, they go beyond our nuclear family. Supportive relationships that extend out to our community, our teachers, our neighbors, our pastors, etc. And then the last one there, you got to point this clicker back behind me, I think, is access to resources. Okay, access to resources is key in order for us to have that capacity for resilience. Okay, the concept of the self-made man or self-made woman is a myth. Okay, it does not exist. Okay, one of my buddies tells a story. He's like, I would love to meet the person that claims that they're self-made because that meant that they basically built their own roads. They cut down their own tree to make their own books, to carve their own pencils. They did it all on their own. Okay, and that just doesn't exist. We look at this beautiful facility that we are, again, honored and privileged. I'm honored and privileged to be presenting here, and I have to think about all those people that worked very, very hard to erect this building. Okay, all of the laborers, again, the contractors, subcontractors, so all of the people that come through this facility that benefit from this facility, they have those before them to think about that. Okay, so access to resources is very important. I want to briefly talk about my own personal experience when it comes to resilience. And so I was born in Mexico City, or a suburb of Mexico City. I grew up in a house very similar to the one that you see here. My dad built out of brick and mortar, rebar, and corrugated aluminum for a roof. He dug out our little outhouse and, put rebar floor and toilet and all of that, right? So my dad had our house, or he built our house. I am blessed to have contracted polio. And I know that's going to seem kind of strange and kind of weird or maybe odd, but the fact that I got polio at age 2 in Mexico, it afforded me a lot of many opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Okay, so I'm very honest and upfront and realistic about that. The other thing that I'm very blessed or lucky, some might say, is that I was born in near Mexico City, where I had access to a wonderful little hospital known as the Shriners Hospital for children. That hospital, my family was able to, bring me there, obviously through several buses and cab rides. My mom lugging, carrying me and 2 other children in tow through the busy the streets of Mexico City to get to this hospital, so that I would have access to medical care, dental care, braces and crutches and anything that I would need. Okay, so that I could go to school and be productive in my community. Hello, we're going backwards. I also like to reflect about what if I were born somewhere else. Okay, I don't know if any of you guys still know that polio still exists around the world. Okay, there are 3 countries in the world that still are dealing with it: Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Nigeria. Okay? And so I wonder about what if I were born in a country like Afghanistan, okay, where I don't have access to that safe environment. Okay? I was lucky enough to be born in a place both in Mexico, but then moved to the U.S., where I had environments that were free of toxins, free of drugs, free of war. Okay? And so I always felt safe. I didn't have to worry about my own personal survival as some of our kiddos that are growing up with polio in Afghanistan currently are. Then I also think about what if I were born in Nigeria, okay, a country that even though we send a lot of resources, or countries around the world send resources to, they still lack access to many, many wonderful things. Okay, again, access to medical care, access to equipment. I look at these young boys up here. One of them who's basically crawling on all fours, and again, they're resilient. Okay, they're getting by. Okay, but then I compare their environment to what I grew up with. Okay, both in the U.S. and in Mexico, I had access to wonderful educators. I had access to resources and funding so that I could go to a wonderful university, University of Illinois, go Illini. Sorry, Badgers. I had, and I had access to medical care, but besides that, I also had access to recreational resources, right? And so, we look at the picture before with those kids are walking around on makeshift wooden, crutches and leg braces. And not to offend those of you that are old school about your crutches and you like the old wooden crutches versus the high-tech aluminum. But I look at my life, and I had the privilege and the honor to basically represent both my countries, right? Mexico in my heart, and the U.S. on my uniform, and in my mind and in my heart as well, at 2 Paralympic events. I got to travel many of the roads around the world competing in marathons and on, famous stadiums, using about $10,000 worth of high-tech equipment, right? Carbon fiber wheels, aluminum and titanium wheelchairs. And so, it's been a tremendous privilege and honor for me. And a lot of it is the result of, those quality of life descriptors that they mentioned earlier. Because I had a safe environment, okay? I was connected, not only with my family, but with individuals in my community. And these opportunities allowed me to be healthy and to prosper. Okay, so a lot of this I owe to the people around me, okay? Where I grew up, my community. Some of it, again, is situational, and some of it is mental or genetic. So I want to leave you with this. Okay, so I want to point out 2 of the calls to action that they mentioned earlier, and one that I've added to. The first one is access to mental care. Okay, our mental health needs are so important. Okay, I was again lucky enough that my needs were physical in nature, but many of our children and our community members are basically they have significant social and emotional needs that aren't being addressed or that aren't being met. Okay, as a result of poverty, they're resource poor. When you're resource poor, a lot of our families seek to maladaptive coping ways, which then lead to poor caregiving, which then leads to our children and our families having toxic stress, okay, or toxic stress adaptation, which leads to isolation, anxiety, and depression. Okay? And so we have to address that. The second point there is bullying or social isolation. Okay? We know that in order for us to be resilient, we have to have a very wide relational safety net. Okay? That means that we have to have access to individuals that are there to help us in a time of need, that are there to support us both socially, emotionally, and physically, financially. And so it's very important. I look at that number, that 27%, and I compare that to when I was working in the classroom. And so for me to think that 6 of my students in my classroom, out of a classroom of 24, potentially wouldn't feel comfortable enough to come to me and say, Mr. Iniguez, I need this, or I'm struggling with that. It breaks my heart. Okay? But we know that happens. Okay? And so we have to move some of that social, we got to find ways to connect. Okay? So we have to find ways to, how do we develop healthy relationships and supports? Because those are the key to resilience. Okay? Resilience is all about relationships and connections. Remember that, again, resilience is not a static concept, it's dynamic. Okay? And it depends a lot, not only, again, your family, your community, okay? But it depends a lot on folks like yourselves that are here invested in your communities. And this community is doing so many, many wonderful things, but we have to still strive and continue to do more. Okay? Thank you for your time.
All right, thanks, Tony. He's got a car issue here we're going to check on, so that's why he's moved off the stage, but we're hoping he's going to come back. We're going to show another video right now, and then when we're done, we'll introduce our next speaker.
Class, definitely. I feel like a lot of high schoolers notice this, but like when you're younger, you have like so many friends in the world because like none of you care about how much like money your parents make, or they don't care like if you have to wear like the same clothes every day. There's a lot of people that were friends when I was way younger, like before any class mattered and stuff like that. And then like when I went to high school, like I would try to say something to that person and they would just like act like they don't know me. They feel like they're better than me just because, you know, I don't have all the stuff that they have, or I can't like do everything that they do.
Like if you're categorized as a prep, you're usually wealthy. You usually have the right clothes and you have the parents and the sports and all that. But if you don't have that, you're usually categorized lower and you're not in that group.
My mom lost her job, so we have been really struggling. We don't have a lot of food. The food that we get is the food from the school. I didn't have a lot of nice clothes, like they were really dumpy, and nobody wanted to be my partner or anything, and they just didn't accept me, I guess, just because of the way I look and how I dress. This year I just snapped and I didn't want any more of that. I didn't want to be treated that way anymore.
I know a lot of my friends, Mexican friends, parents work at Aviland or on farms. And so just that kind of work, it's demanding, it takes a lot on you, and there's not a lot of time you see your parents if your parents work in those kind of jobs.
Because my mom works second shift, so I take care of my little sister, and then on the weekends I try to spend time with her.
I got a job the week I turned 14. I usually work 70 to 80 hours a week during the summer and 30 to 40 during the school year.
Sometimes like high school students have this like sense of entitlement, or like they shouldn't have to work for things, and it's like that's not really the case for me. Like I feel like everything I've done to this point like I've earned, and I don't think that all high school students like really share that idea like I should work for what I have. You miss out on like the struggles of other people, and I also think that can lead to like deriding people or like belittling them because they don't have those same types of privileges.
Cell phones, internet access at home, being able to communicate socially on social media and stuff.
I have a distance learning class, and I gotta check my email and the Blackboard and everything, and I don't have a computer in my house.
I think the people who have more money are wealthier, dress better, they fit in better, they just get along with teachers, get better grades, and feel better about themselves. Especially since there's so much emphasis put on the way you look and the way you dress. And when kids don't have access to what's in, I feel like their confidence lowers.
I think it just comes down to like people who have like more money and people who have less money, because I think that kind of plays into a lot of other issues like race, or like the opportunities that you feel are available to you, or like maybe even who's depressed and who's not.
Okay, Just a comment on the video series. It is available online if you go to Healthy Marathon County website, and all the videos are there. So they're very well done, and they cover a bunch of different topics. So we encourage you to check those out. All right, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and many of us know her, and I kind of feel like I just need to reference her by her first name, Antonina Olszewski. She's the Director of Spiritual Care for Ascension, Wisconsin. Antonina has been with Ministry Healthcare and Ascension since 2010. Antonina has a master's degree in organizational leadership and quality from Marian University. She also has a bachelor's degree in genetics and European history from UW-Stevens Point. She has studied biochemistry at University of California at Berkeley, as well as has certifications from UW-Madison from the School of Business. Locally, as I mentioned, very well known and very well connected and involved. Antonina has served on numerous boards, including the Women's Community, United Way of Marathon County, Healthy Marathon County, Blessings in a Backpack, and Rural Health Initiative. So we're going to turn it over to Antonina.
Thank you. I always have to see how tall my shoes are for the day to see how the mic works for me. So thank you, Jeff. That was very kind. I have to say that I did not actually see nor hear Tony's speech before he gave it, but he definitely took a personal bent that I'm going to dive into as well. Jeff actually asked me to tell a story when I was talking about resilience, and I decided the best way to do that was to tell my story. So my name, again, is Antonina Olszewski, and you need to know that I am a love child. So my parents told me repeatedly that I was born because they had an all-encompassing, huge love affair. And I say this because when you're talking about your community and you're talking about resilience, things such as being loved as a child really matter. And I think to really understand anyone, it's helpful to hear their personal story and where they came from. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history about me and let you walk for a little bit in my shoes. And then I'm going to move to how the way I have developed some personal resiliency can be mirrored, hopefully, in our community. To start, my mother was the oldest of 5 children. And that sounds like I'm going way back. Just walk with me for a minute. It's not going to be too excessive. She was raised in an upper middle class Irish and Scotch family in a suburb of Pasadena, California. She went to USC. She did all the right things. She was engaged to a pre-med student by the time she was a sophomore. And then she took a class that my father was teaching. And she fell madly in love. And she called off her engagement. She had a torrid affair with my father. And a month before she turned 22 years old, I was born. My sister was born 15 months after me. But life for my mother had changed rather dramatically in the meantime. She had been disowned and disinherited by her parents for having a mixed-race child. She had discovered that my father's reticence to marry her had far less to do with her being white and of a different social class, and far more to do with the fact that he was already married. My mother left college at that point and made a personal life decision that was pretty dramatic, decided that with 2 biracial children, she wanted them to flourish, and decided to move to the U.S. Virgin Islands, figuring that raising us in an environment that was governed primarily by people of color would be a benefit to us. Of course, I didn't know as a child that my parentage was unusual. I didn't know that my mother had grown up very affluently and had a horrible comprehension of finance. I didn't know that it was a disadvantage to be born out of wedlock or to be born to a father who was foreign and of a different color than my mother. I was just happy, right? My mom moved us to the U.S. Virgin Islands. I grew up on the ocean. What was there not to love? I was a happy child. And by the way, if any of you know me, you know that I still love to go to the ocean and spend time there. So, because she was worried about our schooling, however, and because she was worried about our futures, our mother moved us back to the mainland when I was 8 years old. And unbeknownst to me, her parents purchased our home because although they did not want to interact with us directly, they also didn't want to have grandchildren living, in their words, on the street. So I grew up in a neighborhood that actually didn't reflect my family's income because, in point of fact, my family had no money. So I grew up on, at the time, what would have been called welfare and food stamps. And I say this with no shame because I had no shame about it. I have to tell you, as a child, I remember thinking that green money was very boring. And if any of you know what a food stamp looks like, they're very beautiful. They used to be like pieces of paper that were, every denomination was a different color. And I remember moving to Europe and looking at the money in Europe for the first time with a friend and saying, oh, this is so beautiful. It reminds me of food stamps. And my friend was like, was that a joke? And I was like, no, and I was like, not at all. Like, this is great. I'm back where I began. Anyway, my childhood was typical for someone in the circumstances that we were in, I think. We didn't own a car, so we took the bus every place. We were very lucky. I love Tony's conversation about access. I did grow up in a city, so we had access to public transportation. At the time, we didn't have any health insurance, so we had free clinics, and we utilized them, so I was fortunate that that was available to us. We didn't have a lot of money, as I pointed out, so we learned a lot of coping mechanisms. For instance, in a large city, you have water mains in front of every house, and when you don't pay your water bill, the waterman comes out and turns off the water. And if you have a resourceful parent, as I did, you learn how to take a crowbar and go outside and open the water main and turn it back on when he leaves. So I didn't feel like I suffered. I felt like I just needed a crowbar, right? And life was good. It was easy. My next door neighbor had a Jaguar in the driveway. I put this in context just to say we didn't have a car. My next door neighbor had a Jag, but I didn't understand that I was poor. I was young. I didn't know what that really meant. And I love in the video we just showed about class how one of the students points out that when they're younger, you don't think about things like that. And it only happens when you become older that you start to realize that you have differences between the people that you're around. So we didn't eat out. We didn't have designer clothes. We didn't have the latest tennis shoes, but we had a house and we had food. And so I always felt like things could have been a lot worse. My mother was funny. There were a few things that she carried over from her background. So she insisted that we learn what she called, in quotation, manners. And my sister and I, for instance, would sit down at the kitchen table and she would lay out a set of silverware for an 8-course meal. And we had to learn how to do that, and we had to learn what all the silverware was for. So I knew what a fish knife was, and I knew what an escargot spear was, and I knew what this salad fork was and that dessert spoon, despite the fact that I had never had an 8-course meal in my entire life. If we used improper grammar at home, my mother would stop us in the middle of what we were saying, make us correct our sentence ourselves. She didn't care if it was in the middle of dinner. She didn't care if there were 10 people around. She didn't care. She would just say stop and say, what was that? So to this day, my mother does that. My husband is sitting in the audience, so he can vouch for the fact that if anyone walks up and says, me and him went to the store, my mother's like, wait, who are you? And where are you from? And stop. So she does that still. And when we went to church, we were impeccable. Everything had to match. So our shoes matched our belt, matched our hat, matched our purse, or we did not leave the house. Period. No exceptions to that. I did not realize at the time the point of that, and I will get into that a little bit later. What I did start to realize as I got a little bit older was that my mother was eccentric. So she would do fun things, like Thursdays were the free day at the museum. So it was very common that Thursday mornings we would wake up and she would say, "We're not going to school, we're going to the museum." I just thought that was what cool mothers did, right? We went to the museums on Thursdays. But she would also burn a lot of toast and save it and cut out designs from the toast and shellac it and use it as Christmas ornaments. I cannot make that up. I ask people all the time, what do you mean you've never made a Christmas ornament out of shellac burnt toast? Like, how does that not happen in your house? Because that happened in my house all the time. She'd wake us up in the middle of the night during school nights and tell us that it was a beautiful night. We had to go stargazing, so we would all get dressed and go outside and watch the stars. By the time I started realizing her eccentricity was unusual, I was probably in junior high, going into high school. We would now say that my mother was bipolar, and she has been diagnosed that way. But again, as a child, when this is your sole caregiver, you rationalize the behavior that you grow up with. When I was 12, my life changed again. So my mom had gone back to school, she finished school, she became a teacher. We bought a car, it's a big deal. I remember that my family owned their first car when I turned 12. And my sister went to jail for the first time. So by this time, I definitely realized that my family was not like the other families on the block. I had started to realize that we did not have money, and I, again, like that video because I think that's about the age when you start realizing that you are poor, economically poor anyway, let me be clear about that. And because my mother sat us down and said, so college is non-negotiable, it's a mandatory, but we don't have any money. So you need to do really well in school because you have to go to college and you have to make that happen somehow. I took that to heart. I did well in school. I received a scholarship to a private high school. I went to various colleges, beginning with an Ivy League one. But then I started looking at the rest of my family and wondering what was going on with, for instance, my sister, who was not doing as well as I seemed to be doing, and why was that happening? So what was making me this different type of more resilient person than my sibling? I mentioned my sister before, that she went to jail for the first time when she was 11. That was due to a situation with drugs, which she struggled with for many years in her life. She dropped out of high school. She had her first child when she was 16 and her second child when she was 19. She left her husband finally when her husband threatened to kill their son. And she has worked at different times in her life as a drug dealer, a real estate agent, a wedding cake baker, a call girl, a horse trainer, and a commodities trader. But if you met her before you met me, you would like her more. And I say this seriously. She's electric. She is on fire when she talks to you. She has thousands of ideas. She is fun. She is scary. She is dynamic. She's about 5'3" and weighs 100 pounds and lights up the entire room. In her late 30s, she was also diagnosed as bipolar. And in the last few years, she's become, I would say, more stable, no less interesting, through a combination of counseling and medication that she has finally had better access to. And she's now doing very well. She lives in Tucson. She raises horses and breeds organic beef. But when I look back on the difference in the two of our lives, I have wondered a lot, why did my sister have so many challenges and I seem to be able to avoid them? And why did it take her over 40 years to become stable when I have been pretty balanced for most of my life? In our community over the past couple of years, we've talked a lot about ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, and a lot about how they affect a person's ability to become resilient in the future. I know that Tony touched on this, Scientific studies tell us that ACEs, so abuse, neglect, violence, abandonment, a lack of safety, mental illness, has been linked to lots of things in a person's future, right? You perform risky health behaviors, you tend to have chronic health conditions, you have a lower life potential, you have an earlier death rate. And as the number of ACEs that you're exposed to increases, so do these negative health effects. Therefore, building resilience, or this ability to snap back after stress, and I love that dandelion analogy. I think I'm going to remember it forever. You get mowed down and the mower goes over and the dandelion's like, no, you didn't. Like, here I am. I love that. But that ability to snap back is of paramount importance in creating people who are healthy and functional and emotionally well-balanced. So many combinations of factors contribute to resilience, and I'm not going to go into that deeply. I think Tony did a lovely job of that. But I am going to point out that that ability to develop caring and supportive relationships and having strong role models that offer encouragement and reassurance is one of the fundamental ways that we can build resilience in our community. And it is not a trait that you have or don't have. It is a trait that can be developed. And once developed, it needs to be continually worked upon so that it can be maintained. But it's not as if having had a difficult life or a difficult situation or even difficulties in our community makes it harder to become resilient. In fact, it tends to be that reaction to stress and that determination that you need to do something to survive a stressful situation helps to foster and build resilience. So, how do we as a community develop in ways that support resilience building? And what factors have helped me to become a fairly stable and successful person despite having some childhood stressors that I articulated? First of all, everyone has touched on it, but I have to emphasize, we need to engage and support people, right? As I said, it's fundamentally relationships that help to build resilience. So we need to look at our community and the ways in which we can support both children and adults in it. And I agree that this begins in the home, but understanding ACEs and understanding the reality of society today, we have to acknowledge that there are many children who don't have a home environment that's conducive to supporting them. And therefore, we need to bolster in our community alternative support systems. Systems that can interface with children regardless of their personal living situations. Ensuring that we have strong schools, for instance, and educational programs in which staff understand the effects of ACEs is of paramount importance. And we're very fortunate in Marathon County because for the most part we do. And for the most part, our school systems and our educational systems really embrace new ideas like ACEs. So supporting organizations that are geared towards youth support is also of paramount importance. And for situations that merit it, we have to be able to afford both timely and affordable counseling services. And I would say that this is an area that everybody knows and we struggle with. So one of the things as a community that we need to really work on is putting some resources where we know that we need them, and that is one where we do lack. I had incredible teachers who mentored me, who pushed me, who challenged me. Without them, I wouldn't have had the academic success I had. I went to after-school programs that kept me engaged in positive activities. I had adults who listened to me, who were concerned about my concerns. All of these factors helped to both challenge and ground me, while supporting the understanding that I developed that I was an individual with value and worth. We need to be able to do that for the youth in our community as well. Additionally, we need to be able to do that by supporting adults in our community who are struggling or have stressful situations of their own. So whether it be parenting questions or parenting struggles, difficulties with mental health issues, financial concerns, struggles with addiction, which as we know is an incredibly pervasive problem right now. or if it's to re-engage people who have somehow been marginalized from society. So through loss of employment, through incarceration, through domestic or sexual violence, or through isolation, how do we work with the organizations that we have here to reintegrate those people into society and help them build resilience? I say we are fortunate as a community because we do have an incredible number of resources. And I look in the room and I think all of us are in this room engaged in addressing problems like this. But I encourage you to engage with organizations to as great a degree as possible and to encourage others to do so, because it's only through fostering these types of relationships that the resilience that we're talking about becomes sustainable and ongoing in our community. I also look at our community and I think, how can we adapt, right? We're living in a time of a changing society. I've been in this community about 13 years, and it's changed dramatically even since I've been a part of it. Our racial demographic is becoming more diverse, particularly in our younger population. Our social economic milieu is a bit more nuanced. New technologies are flourishing, and we have niche industries even, right? Microbreweries are really hot in our area. But in reflecting on my childhood, I'm amazed at the lengths that my family went through to ensure that I never felt marginalized or ostracized because of the color of my skin or the economic status of my family. And I don't mean that everyone needs to move to an island to fit in. That was a little bit dramatic. I had hoped that in my 40-plus years, our society might have come a little bit further in addressing some things like an understanding that your ethnic background or your skin color did not determine your inclusion in society. And that's not quite true yet. So I bring to this conversation a quick conversation I had the other day with someone. And someone looked at me and they were complaining and they said, you know, I have to go to another diversity training session at work. I mean, seriously, it's like my 10th one. This is such a waste of time and money. And I went, really? Is your staff really diverse? Do you have women in positions of authority at your company? Do you have minority representation where appropriate? Do you have people who are respected regardless of their sexual orientation? And they kind of looked at me and I said, because if you can't say yes to all those things, we probably need to be still holding diversity training sessions in our workplaces. Sometimes people think that problems are solved because they did one thing about it. I would bring you back to Tony's point. Diversity is resilience is a dynamic entity and idea. It is not a static one. We need to keep working on it in our community so that we know that we are continually moving forward and transforming ourselves to be able to adapt. I hope that by acknowledging the richness of all the people who make up our community, ensuring their inclusion into our community culture and respecting their contributions, will come to a common understanding that that's essential for the future of our community, for its adaptability, for its transformation. But I know our community has changed in a lot of other ways too. So internet connectivity and social media has led to this wonderful explosion of knowledge and ideas for many. But we don't have equal access for all. I know this. I live in a rural part of the county. My internet is horrible. I some days come into my office just because I'm too frustrated to work on a computer at home. So building dependable broadband throughout our county is one of those essential things that's going to help to not only bolster our community, but help build resilience. However, it has that downside that we always need to be looking at when we're looking at two sides of a society. And one is social media and internet availability has also opened the door to all of these new concerns, right? We have cyberbullying. Like that's something that didn't exist, obviously, when I was young. We have online sexual predators. We have disorders associated with excessive screen time. I mean, who would have thought that would be a thing, right? We have social isolation. So we need to be aware of both the positive and the negative influences in our changing society. And we need to look at our youth and our culture and work on ways at maintaining that healthy balance between all of the forces that are at work on us. In other words, we need to build resilience, which allows people to flourish as they engage with new things, even as they might encounter difficulties while doing so. I also could not have foreseen the widening gap between those who have and those who have not. Coming from an affluent background, my mother believed that teaching my sisters and me to use an 8-place table setting, back to the forks, right? Despite never having had an 8-course meal, would ensure that I never found myself in a situation that made me feel out of place or as if I didn't belong just because my social status and my economic status was different than others. So we need to work harder to ensure that youth don't feel less than in any way because of their family's finances. And finally, I need to address what happens when we don't address these feelings. So feelings of isolation, problems of substance abuse, difficulties with personal identity and race, the complexity of mental health, and most importantly, when we don't give enough love to those around us. Let me refer one last time to my personal story. And I can argue that my sister and I made different choices in our life, and this would be true. But it's just as true that I don't suffer from mental health issues. I was supported and mentored, so I never became involved with drugs. I was secure in my personal identity, probably because I was older when my mother moved me to some place to let me use role models of color as an example. And despite being ostracized by my mother's family, I always knew that I was loved. I was, and have always been told that I was, a love child. I'm not sure that my sister can say the same, and I don't know if her path in life would have been easier if she could. But I do know that the principal component of building resilience in both individuals and communities begins with our ability to forge positive relationships. And that only becomes possible when we reach out to one another and use our courage to create relationships built on love. Thank you.
All right, I'd just like to say thank you so much to both of our speakers for being transparent, sharing their stories, and allowing us time to think about a big topic like resilience. We're going to take a few minutes now to open the floor to question and answers. So if you have questions for our speakers, I think we have people walking around with microphones, so just please raise your hand. Someone's got to have a question.
I see a hand, a brave hand.
Yeah, even if it's just a comment, we open the floor.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, are there any major changes that you're noticing in this life report versus what we've seen in the past years? Anything that stood out to you that has really been a significant shift?
I'll start with that one. Yes, I saw bullying and broadband access. Those are two new topics that rose to the call to action level, and I think it makes us all really acknowledge, some of the community conversations, around bullying and broadband. But when we can do our priority setting process, and it's extensive. Our steering committee and our subcommittees can actually attest to that. And those two issues rise up, and they've never risen up before. I think that is absolutely noteworthy.
I want to add something that I think that when we talk about the bullying concept, one of the biggest things that helps expand, again, our relational safety net, and that helps us address that whole bullying, that isolation, is what Antonina mentioned about diversity. that when we are more open in our views, whether it's political, whether it's, again, class-based, like the video talked about, racial, whatever it is, cultural, the more open we are, the more we have to move beyond we have to move beyond tolerance, right? We have to go a step above tolerance. We have to go to acceptance. We have to accept differences in others. And when we do that, when we teach our kids that, people are different around the world, whether it's, again, color of your skin, status, that's the only way that we're going to counteract the effects of bullying. We have to move away from that social isolation, from that close-mindedness that I think it's very prevalent in our current, both political and also social context.
Thank you.
I think another just quick difference for this report was the advisory committee. And Karen pointed that out in her comments at the beginning. And what was good about having that committee was, as Karen mentioned, we have steering committee and a lot of meetings, and we have subcommittees and a lot of meetings, hours and hours and hours of looking and working. And then you bring in this group of people that really haven't been part of that. And they look at all the information, and they look at the calls to action and the progress and success, and they give you this clear, concise, quick view of something. Sometimes the report, when you work so much with it, you can just begin to see, what you see. And it's nice to have a group of people that haven't been doing that. So having that this time, we really liked that fresh set of eyes on the information from the report. Okay, we got one right there, and then we got one right there. So we'll start there, and then we'll catch you in a second.
I kind of wanted to follow up with Antonina on the difference between you and your sister. And I'm thinking back to a previous presentation that we had on the importance of birth to 3. And you were the first child. And, I know how we are with our first child. We put a lot of attention to it. And probably that contact that you and your mother had, you were the apple of her eye and all this kind of thing. And then your sister came along, and your mother's a little bit farther along in her relationship with your father at that time, and things might have started. I'm wondering if she didn't have that same eye contact, all of that feedback that she was able to give to your sister, and if she was getting the support to be able to do that. Things are probably falling around, her life is probably starting to fall. And I'm wondering if we still need to remember that we need to support those adults as things are falling apart so that they can give that feedback to their children. And I just was something that I'm wondering about, and that we don't need to forget the support we need to give to parents when things are starting to fall apart so that they can give that support to their children.
I think that's critical, and I agree with you. Remembering that parents enter in stressful situations, and that changes their relationship and their ability to have certain relationships with their children. I definitely think that came into play in my family. I also think that that feeling that I was always given, that I was important and worthy, might have fallen off a little bit by no malicious intent, but just because the situation had changed. And so I think that I was able to always find and interact with people who reinforced that feeling. And I don't know if that was the same situation for my sister. I would posit that it was not. So I think that being aware of the fact that every single child needs to be able to have those types of relationships. And that just because you see a family where you see a child who's doing well doesn't mean that the other children or people in the family can be assumed to be doing as well and assumed to have built the same types of relationships. So that understanding that every child has worth and needs, I think, was something that I was hoping to point out in that story. But good point, thank you.
I have often thought that 6th grade girls are the most malicious group of girls. You talked about being happy as children and then at some point realizing you were different. It seems to me that that often happens in 6th grade. Is there an age group that we should target in a way that's a little different than the way we've been targeting it to stop that bullying part?
So I'm going to respond to that just briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tony, who is more of an educator, or other educators in the room. I can say from personal experience, and also because I used to teach 7th and 8th grade, that there's a definite change that happens as children become more aware of themselves. As puberty starts, as people start to pay more attention to what's around them. I thought it was very interesting that one of the students in the class video said, when I was young, none of us cared what we looked like or what our clothes were, and all of a sudden I got older and I tried to talk to these people and they wouldn't give me the time of day because I didn't have the right clothes. That's a development, right? Where that happens and how to address that, in my experience, happens when you're a little bit older than a young child. But I would say that some of that awareness has been heightened now because of all of our exposure to things like social media and internet, right? You get on Facebook now and you see ads for clothing. You see suggestions for how you should look. You see tips about beauty. These are things that I wasn't aware of at as young an age, I think, as happens now. So I'm going to defer to Tony, who taught at that age, when that happens and how we could target that.
Yeah. What I would say is that, understanding that, again, how brain development and human development happens, that, when kids are young, they form strong relationships with their caregivers and with adults. And as they start to transition into those middle school stages of their life, their stronger relationships are with their peers. And that's because the parts of their brain, the limbic parts of their brains are starting to be more engaged. Which is basically like our emotional or our relational centers. But regardless of that, I think that all children, whether they're early education, early elementary, middle school, they're all going to benefit from having caregivers, teachers that are loving and attentive and patient with them. One of the things that as educators we don't really do a good job of is modeling the right responses to stressful situations. We want kids to learn how to be successful adults, how to interact, well, how to respond well under stress. But yet, when we, as classroom teachers and as parents for that matter, when we are under stress, we yell at our kids, we're short with them, our nonverbals are very evident to them. And so I think that when we're dealing with young, with middle-aged or middle school kids, we have to be more aware of the fact that, one, they're gonna relate closer to their peers, but they're also still watching a lot of our nonverbals, and we still need to treat them with nurture, respect and love. So hopefully that ends, helps a little bit.
We have one over there.
I think that so many teachers are really concerned about the mental health issues that we have, not only in this county, but in our United States, actually. Excuse me. And I'm so glad that there are some teachers like yourself, Tony, and like you, Anna, Tom, that have had experience in the classroom helping kids. When I talk with teachers, though, today, and maybe I'm a retired school counselor, for the last 5 years, I've heard teachers say how their classroom duties have changed so much, and they have so little time. And these are good people that are truly concerned about the mental health issues in the broadest way. But the mandates have expanded and broadened, and their responsibilities for data processing, for monitoring their work, for all that paperwork has so increased too. They honestly don't feel that they have the time, and they don't feel that their heart is in the right place anymore, that they can't do the job that they went to school years and years ago to help kids, and they don't feel appreciated or understood by the community. So when we're talking about resiliency and sustainable resiliency, and we all know that that depends on developing and keeping those relationships, how do we get into these school people in our county or even in our city between the two systems that we have? I've talked about this so often, I never get a good answer.
I think that there's a big push from the state, from DPI, and they're really, again, they're trying to get the word out about ACEs and how poverty and trauma affects brain development. Because what ends up happening is when children experience, and we tend to think more in terms of like neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, but poverty is just, poverty, you're basically dosing children on a day-to-day basis with low levels or high levels of stress that actually affect the way their brain develops. And so really the best thing that we can do in order to address the mental health issue is that, we have, number one, we have to find ways so that all of our families and our communities, that their basic needs are met. Okay, as humans, we are wired to survive, and our main focus is to have food, water, so physical safety and survival, shelter, and if those things aren't addressed, the parts of our brain that are responsible for learning and relationships, those shut down, and we basically just focus on survival, and so learning doesn't happen. And so then what ends up happening is teachers have to have this information and this knowledge, knowing that the best thing that you can do for a child that is struggling is to form that relationship and that connection. The school system has already bought into quite a bit of this. We provide breakfast and lunch for a lot of kids in our, in our schools. So we're buying into the part about, that they have to be fed, we have to meet that need, but now we also have to address the social and the emotional. And I think our teachers are doing more with that, understanding that learning doesn't happen if you are not in a good mental place. And so it is, it's our teachers have a tough job of not only trying to meet the needs and the standards that are set upon us by the state, but then also, trying to meet those social and emotional needs that those kids need. One of the best ways that we can do is, again, by providing that education to our young parents, to our communities about how important it is for them to be able to meet those social and emotional needs of children. Like you mentioned about, again, that eye contact, that nurturance, all of that is so important for development. But I think that I know the schools are moving towards that, and all we can do is just keep providing this information to the schools. Many of the principals that I've talked to, they buy into this. They understand it and they get it. And the wonderful thing is that then they're able to communicate that information to their teachers to say, look, I'm not so concerned about the fact that some of your kids are not meeting or exceeding. I'm more concerned that you're meeting their social, emotional needs, because when those are met, then we're going to be able to access those parts of the brain that are responsible for learning. And unfortunately, learning's not going to happen unless kids have those basic needs met.
Great. We're going to conclude at this point, but if you do have other questions or comments, I think they'll stick around and you can catch them after we close. So with that, I'd like to thank each one of you for coming. As you've heard over and over, it takes each one of us has a part in building resiliency in our community. And I'd like to just bring you back to something that Jeff mentioned in his introduction with the 6 foundations of resilience, and that's courage. And courage really does bring us back to the first foundation, which is people. Because it's the people like each one of you in our community who will build this resilience. And those pieces are the courage to work with other people and to share in taking responsibility for our community. The courage to tackle the complex systemic issues that we are facing. The courage to learn from our experiences and to adapt our thinking and our methods. The courage to accept uncertainty and to make big transformations when necessary. The courage to commit to far-reaching and long-term resilience building that is truly sustainable for generations to come. So we do have a few things that we would like to leave you with. Hopefully each one of you has one thing that you took away from our presenters today that you can do to build resilience, whether that's on an individual level, a family level, a community level, or an organizational level. We encourage you, once we conclude, that you take the life report and please dive into it, read it thoroughly. We've put a lot of work and effort into building this report, and please share it. Share it far and wide, and share those pieces of resilience that you're going to take with you today. And get involved. We have a lot of great things going on in our community at all different levels, so we encourage you to speak with one of us and get involved. So thank you for being here today.